The courtroom had never been so quiet. Reporters filled every seat. Prosecutors smiled with confidence. Rival crime families waited for the empire of the most feared man in Korea to collapse in front of the entire nation. The judge adjusted his glasses and asked one final question. Does the defense have anything else to present? Before anyone could answer, the heavy courtroom doors opened. Every head turned. A young woman dressed in a simple navy suit walked inside, carrying only a worn leather briefcase. She looked calm, almost ordinary, but the moment the Korean Mafia boss saw her, his expression changed for the first time in years. His hands, usually steady enough to command thousands of loyal men, trembled. He whispered only two words. "She's alive." No one else in the courtroom understood why the most powerful crime boss in the country suddenly looked like a father who had just found his lost daughter. The young woman smiled softly before speaking. "Your Honor, I apologize for being late. I believe this trial has been missing one very important piece of evidence. 15 years earlier, no one would have imagined this moment. Back then, Kang Min-jae ruled an empire that stretched far beyond Seoul's glittering skyline. Politicians feared him. Business executives negotiated carefully whenever his name entered a conversation. Even rival organizations preferred peace over war whenever possible. Newspapers called him a ruthless businessman. Police departments suspected much more, but could never prove it. To the public, he was a mystery. To his enemies, he was a nightmare. Yet every evening, after meetings worth millions of dollars and decisions that shaped the future of countless companies, Min-jae drove through the oldest neighborhood in the city without security vehicles following behind. His bodyguards hated this routine. They begged him to stop because the narrow streets were unpredictable and dangerous. He always refused. "You never know who needs help when everyone else is looking away," he once told his driver. The driver never understood what he meant. One freezing winter night, snow covered the sidewalks like a white blanket. Most people hurried home to escape the bitter wind. Street vendors packed away their carts. Restaurants closed early. As Min-jae's black sedan approached an old bridge, something unusual caught his attention. A little girl sat alone beside a broken vending machine. She couldn't have been older than 8. She wore shoes that were 2 sizes too big, a thin sweater with holes in the sleeves, and a small backpack that looked almost empty. She wasn't begging. She wasn't crying. Instead, she carefully divided a piece of stale bread into tiny crumbs and placed them in front of several hungry pigeons. Min-jae watched silently through the window. His driver frowned. "Sir, should we keep moving?" "No." The car stopped. The bodyguards quickly stepped out, scanning every direction for danger, but Min-jae ignored them. He walked slowly toward the child. "What are you doing?" he asked. The little girl looked up with wide eyes. "They're hungry. So are you." She smiled. "They're smaller than me." Those 6 words struck him harder than any threat he had ever faced. He noticed the bread was the only food she had. "You gave away your dinner." She shrugged. "If I eat alone, I'm still hungry tomorrow. If they eat too, maybe today is a little happier." Min-jae had spent decades surrounded by people chasing power, money, and influence. No one had ever spoken to him like that. "What is your name?" "Hana." "Where are your parents?" Her smile disappeared. "I don't know anymore." He didn't ask another question. Instead, he removed his expensive wool coat and gently placed it around her shoulders. She immediately tried giving it back. "It's too nice. So, you'll be cold." For the first time in years, Kang Min-jae laughed. "My driver worries enough for both of us." The driver sighed from several feet away. "Sir, that's true." Even Hana giggled. It was a tiny sound, but it somehow made the cold night feel warmer. Min-jae bought 2 bowls of hot soup from the only restaurant still open. While they ate together, he learned pieces of her story. Her parents had disappeared after a factory closed several years earlier. Different relatives took her in for short periods before deciding she was too expensive to raise. Eventually, she found herself sleeping anywhere she could, under bridges, abandoned buildings, subway stations, wherever the weather allowed. She never asked strangers for money. Instead, she collected recyclable bottles every day. "Why don't you steal?" Min-jae asked carefully. She looked genuinely confused. "Because it belongs to someone else." "What if you're starving?" she answered without hesitation. "Then I'll be hungry." The restaurant owner quietly wiped tears from his eyes while pretending to clean dishes. Min-jae stared at the child for a long moment. He had built an empire through strength, strategy, and decisions others considered impossible. But this little girl possessed something he had almost forgotten existed: integrity. When dinner ended, he asked one final question. "If you could wish for anything, what would it be?" Hana thought seriously. "A room with a window." "Only that? I've never had one. No toys? I can make toys. No television? I can imagine stories. No expensive clothes?" She smiled again. "They get dirty, too." Min-jae looked toward the snowy street outside. Thousands of children probably wanted expensive gifts. This little girl wanted sunlight. That night he made a decision none of his advisors, partners, or enemies would ever understand. He brought Hana home. His mansion overlooked the city from the highest hill, protected by gates, cameras, and dozens of guards. Everyone inside froze when Min-jae walked through the front entrance holding the hand of a homeless child. His chief of security blinked twice. "Boss, prepare the East guest room. For tonight? For as long as she wishes." The housekeeper hurried upstairs. Within an hour, warm clothes, clean blankets, fresh towels, and a homemade dinner filled the room. Hannah stood quietly in the doorway. She had never seen a bedroom larger than the abandoned buildings where she used to sleep. She walked directly to the window. Outside, snow continued falling over Seoul. She touched the glass carefully. "I have one now." She wasn't looking at the luxurious bed. She wasn't amazed by the expensive furniture. She simply smiled at the window. Downstairs, Min-jae stood alone in his office. His oldest friend and trusted advisor, Mr. Choi, entered carrying tea. "You've adopted her." "I have. You know the board will object." "I don't care. Our enemies will call it weakness. They already call me worse." Mr. Choi nodded slowly. "And if someone tries using her against you?" For several seconds, silence filled the room. Then Min-jae answered in a voice colder than winter itself. "They'll discover the difference between my patience and my mercy." Word spread quickly throughout the organization. Some members questioned the decision. Others believed the child would disappear within weeks. Instead, something unexpected happened. The mansion began changing. The guards smiled more often. The cooks prepared extra desserts because Hana always thanked them personally. The gardeners found handwritten notes hidden among flowers, saying, "Thank you for making everything beautiful." Even the mechanics responsible for maintaining the fleet of luxury vehicles received small drawings of cars with smiling faces. One by one, the people who had once feared serving the most powerful man in Korea remembered what kindness felt like. And without realizing it, Kang Min-jae's empire had already begun changing from the inside. 15 years earlier, the people closest to Kang Min-jae believed the little girl would never survive inside a world built on fear and loyalty. They expected her innocence to disappear within months. Instead, something far more surprising happened. The mansion slowly became a home. Hana treated every employee with the same respect, whether they were executives in tailored suits or gardeners working under the hot summer sun. She memorized every housekeeper's birthday, thanked every chef after every meal, and greeted every security guard by name before school each morning. The men who once carried weapons without emotion found themselves carrying school projects, fixing broken bicycles, and arguing over who would teach Hana how to ride one. She became the heart of a place that had never known warmth. Min-jae watched quietly from a distance. He never forced affection. He simply made sure she always had everything she needed. Every morning he left before sunrise for meetings across the city. Yet every evening, no matter how late, he asked the same question before entering his office. Has Hana eaten? The answer mattered more than reports about money, territory, or business deals. When she struggled with mathematics, he hired the best tutor in Korea. When she discovered a love for reading, he filled an entire room with books from around the world. When she mentioned wanting to learn English because she dreamed of speaking to people from America, Canada, and Britain one day, he arranged private language lessons with native teachers. Years passed, and Hana never forgot where she came from. Every winter, she secretly packed warm blankets, coats, gloves, and food into boxes. She asked the mansion staff to help deliver them to homeless shelters without revealing who donated them. One evening, Min Jae followed her without telling anyone. He watched from inside his car as Hana knelt beside an elderly homeless woman and gently wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She stayed nearly an hour, listening to the woman's stories before quietly leaving. She never mentioned the visit after returning home. At dinner, Min Jae simply looked at her and smiled. "How was your afternoon?" Hana smiled back. "It was nice." Neither of them mentioned the shelter. Neither needed to. Trust had become the language they spoke best. Not everyone welcomed Hana's place in Min Jae's life. Several senior members of the organization believed she made the boss appear soft. During a private meeting, one executive finally voiced what others had whispered for years. "Boss, with respect, this girl is a distraction. People fear you less because they see you as a father." The room became silent. Min Jae slowly stood from his chair and walked toward the executive. Everyone expected violence. Instead, Min Jae placed a family photograph on the conference table. It showed 8-year-old Hana laughing while planting flowers beside him. "Tell me," he said quietly, "what exactly do you see?" The executive answered carefully. "Your adopted daughter." "Wrong." The room froze. "I see the only person who has never wanted anything from me except honesty." He looked around the room. "Every one of you came to me asking for money, protection, power, or opportunity." She asked for a room with a window. No one spoke another word. The meeting ended immediately. That night, every member of the organization understood one truth. Hana was untouchable. As the years continued, Hana excelled in school. She wasn't simply intelligent. She possessed a remarkable ability to understand people. Teachers often noticed she solved disagreements before adults even realized problems existed. Classmates trusted her with their secrets because she never judged anyone. By 16, she had become captain of the debate team. By 18, she earned scholarships from prestigious universities. News channels interviewed her after she won an international law competition. Reporters asked what inspired her passion for justice. Hana smiled gently. "Because everyone deserves someone willing to stand beside them when the world has already decided they're guilty." Millions watched the interview. Only one man understood the deeper meaning behind those words. Sitting alone in his office, Min Jae quietly turned off the television before anyone noticed his eyes had filled with tears. Years ago, he had saved a homeless child. Somehow, she had become the person saving pieces of him every single day. At university, Hana studied law with extraordinary determination. Professors described her as brilliant but unusually compassionate. While other students focused on winning arguments, Hana searched for truth. She volunteered at legal aid clinics, helping families who couldn't afford attorneys. She stayed late to prepare documents for elderly clients who had no relatives. She defended immigrants facing unfair treatment. She translated legal forms for international students who struggled with Korean. Every case reminded her of the frightened little girl she once was. She promised herself no child would ever feel abandoned if she could prevent it. Meanwhile, unseen dangers gathered around Min Jae's empire. Powerful rivals had spent years waiting for a weakness. They realized violence could never defeat him. Courts might. Politicians seeking popularity launched investigations into businesses connected to his organization. Financial regulators reopened old cases. Prosecutors assembled special teams determined to dismantle everything he had built. One ambitious prosecutor announced before national television cameras, "No empire is above the law." The public celebrated. Newspapers predicted the fall of Korea's most mysterious business leader. Inside headquarters, panic quietly spread. Advisors urged Min Jae to leave the country temporarily. Others suggested destroying sensitive records before investigators arrived. Some even recommended abandoning trusted associates to protect the organization. Min Jae rejected every proposal. "Running admits fear," he said calmly. "Destroying evidence admits guilt. Betraying loyal people destroys everything worth protecting." His confidence unsettled even his closest allies. Mr. Choi entered the office late one evening, carrying several thick legal files. "The government isn't bluffing anymore," he said. "They've built a serious case." Min Jae nodded without looking surprised. "I expected this day." "Then why didn't you prepare?" Min Jae slowly looked toward the large window overlooking Seoul's lights. A faint smile crossed his face. "Who says I didn't?" Hundreds of miles away, Hana received a mysterious phone call just after finishing a lecture at law school. The caller never gave his name. He simply said, "Your father needs you." Before she could ask another question, the line disconnected. She stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at her phone. She hadn't heard anyone call Kong Min Jae her father in years. Most people referred to him by titles filled with power and fear. Only those who truly understood their relationship used that simple word, father. Without wasting another second, Hana closed her books, canceled every appointment, and booked the first flight home. She had no idea that by the time she arrived in Seoul, the man who had once rescued a homeless little girl would be sitting alone inside the country's most closely watched courtroom, surrounded by enemies who believed his empire was finally about to disappear forever. By the time Hana's plane landed in Seoul, every major television network was broadcasting live outside the courthouse. Satellite vans lined the streets. International reporters from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada described the trial as one of the biggest legal battles in modern Korean history. Headlines declared that Kang Min-jae's empire was only days away from collapsing. Investors panicked. Rival organizations quietly celebrated. Even longtime allies began distancing themselves, believing the end was inevitable. Hana ignored every camera waiting outside the airport. Carrying only her leather briefcase, she stepped into a taxi and asked the driver to take her directly to the courthouse. During the ride, she read thousands of pages of legal documents Mr. Choi had emailed overnight. The more she read, the more concerned she became. The prosecution's case looked convincing. Bank records, corporate transfers, witness statements, and years of financial transactions had been organized into a story that seemed impossible to defeat. But Hana noticed something others had missed. The evidence was impressive, yet the timeline contained tiny inconsistencies. Dates did not always match. Signatures appeared authentic, but were attached to meetings that never happened. Several witnesses repeated identical phrases, almost as if they had memorized the same script. Someone had spent years building a perfect illusion. Hana closed the final file and whispered to herself, "Perfect stories usually hide imperfect truths." At the courthouse, Min Jae remained calm despite the pressure surrounding him. His legal team had spent weeks defending him, but every argument seemed weaker than the prosecution's carefully prepared accusations. During a short recess, one exhausted attorney admitted, "Sir, unless something extraordinary happens today, the judge may rule against us before the week ends." Min Jae simply nodded. "Then we'll wait." The lawyer looked confused. "Wait for what?" Min Jae smiled faintly. "Someone who always keeps her promises." 15 years earlier, on Hana's first night inside the mansion, she had been frightened by the size of her new bedroom. Min Jae sat beside the window while snow fell outside. "Are you afraid?" he had asked. Hana nodded. "What if one day everyone leaves me again?" Min Jae answered without hesitation. "Then I'll stay." She looked at him carefully before replying, "Then one day. If everyone leaves you, I'll stay too." Neither of them imagined that a child's promise would one day decide the future of an empire. Back in the present, court resumed. Prosecutors called another witness, a former accountant who claimed Ming J personally approved illegal financial operations years earlier. The testimony sounded devastating. Jurors listened carefully. Reporters typed every word. The prosecutor smiled confidently after finishing his questions. No further questions. The defense attorney stood but struggled to challenge the witness effectively. Every answer seemed to strengthen the prosecution instead. Finally, the judge asked, "Does the defense have additional evidence?" The attorney hesitated. "No, Your Honor." A heavy silence filled the courtroom. Then the large courtroom doors slowly opened. Everyone turned. A young woman in a navy suit walked inside with quiet confidence, carrying a worn leather briefcase that looked strangely ordinary compared to the expensive suits surrounding her. She approached the defense table without rushing. Reporters whispered to one another, trying to identify her. Prosecutors frowned. The judge adjusted his glasses. Min Jae looked at her and, for the first time in weeks, smiled. "You're right on time," he said softly. Hana returned the smile. "I said I'd stay." She respectfully addressed the judge. "Your Honor, I sincerely apologize for interrupting these proceedings. My name is Hana Kong, attorney at law. I respectfully request permission to join the defense." The courtroom erupted into whispers. The prosecutor immediately objected. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." Hana calmly placed several legal documents on the judge's desk. "The request fully complies with procedural law. My authorization was filed electronically before this morning's session began." The judge reviewed the documents for several moments before nodding. "Request granted." The prosecutor's confidence faded slightly. Hana turned toward the witness stand. "With the court's permission, I would like to begin cross-examination." The witness smiled nervously, believing she was simply another inexperienced attorney. Hana opened her briefcase, removed a notebook filled with handwritten notes, and asked her first question. "You testified that Mr. Kang approved this financial transfer on March 18, correct?" "Yes." "And you're absolutely certain?" "Completely." Hana nodded politely. "Interesting." She displayed a certified immigration record on the courtroom screen. "Could you explain how Mr. Kang signed documents in Seoul on March 18, while he was attending an economic summit in Switzerland that entire week?" The witness froze. Reporters immediately stopped typing. The prosecutor quickly stood. "Objection." Hana remained calm. The immigration records were obtained directly from government archives. Their authenticity has already been certified. The judge examined the documents carefully before overruling the objection. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Hana continued, "Perhaps you confused the date. Let's discuss the meeting itself. You testified it occurred inside Orion Financial Tower." "Yes." "Excellent." She pressed another button on the presentation screen. Building maintenance records appeared. "Would you explain how that meeting occurred when Orion Tower was completely closed after a gas leak that day?" "Every employee was evacuated at 9:12 that morning." The witness swallowed hard. Sweat formed on his forehead. Hana never raised her voice. She simply asked another question, then another, and another. Each answer uncovered another contradiction. Every confident statement slowly unraveled. After 20 minutes, the witness no longer looked certain of anything. Finally, Hana asked quietly, "Did investigators help prepare your testimony?" Silence. "Did anyone promise you reduced charges in exchange for blaming Mr. Kang?" The witness looked toward the prosecutor. Hana noticed immediately, "Please answer the court." The witness's shoulders dropped. "Yes." The courtroom exploded with shocked reactions. Reporters rushed toward the exits to update breaking news. Television producers interrupted regular programming across the country. The prosecutor demanded order, but the damage had already begun. Hana wasn't finished. She calmly presented additional evidence, proving that several key financial documents had been altered after investigators seized them. Independent forensic analysts had identified microscopic differences in digital timestamps. Surveillance footage from government storage facilities showed unauthorized access late at night. Chain of custody records contained unexplained gaps. Piece by piece, the flawless case began falling apart. Even the judge leaned forward with growing interest. Mr. Choi watched from the gallery, unable to hide his smile. He remembered the little girl who once wanted nothing more than a room with a window. Now she stood in the nation's highest-profile courtroom, armed not with power or fear, but with truth. And for the first time since the trial began, Kang Min-jae's enemies realized they had prepared for the most feared man in Korea. But they had never prepared for the daughter he had raised. The atmosphere inside the courtroom changed completely. Only an hour earlier, every headline had predicted Kang Min-jae's downfall. Now reporters were rewriting their stories in real time. Television commentators, who had confidently discussed his conviction, suddenly began questioning the integrity of the investigation itself. The prosecutor requested a short recess, hoping to reorganize his team before Hana could expose anything else, but the judge denied the request. "The court will continue," he announced firmly. "Attorney Kang may proceed." Hana thanked the judge and opened another folder from her briefcase. Unlike the thick binders covering the prosecution's table, her files were neatly organized with handwritten notes attached to every page. She had spent years developing a habit of preparing for every possible question before entering any courtroom. Her professors used to joke that she never walked into a case with a plan. She walked in with every plan. She approached the witness stand once more. "Mr. Lee, you testified that you personally attended confidential financial meetings every Tuesday for nearly 3 years. The witness nodded weakly. "Yes." Hana smiled politely. "Could you remind the court what your official position was during those years?" "Junior accounting assistant." "Interesting." She displayed the company's organizational chart on the courtroom screen. According to company policy, junior accounting assistants were never permitted inside executive meetings. Their security badges couldn't even access the executive floor. The witness stared at the screen. I may have remembered incorrectly." Hana gently shook her head. "No, someone remembered incorrectly for you." The prosecutor immediately objected, but the judge overruled him again. The confidence that had filled the prosecution's table that morning had completely disappeared. Hana continued without raising her voice. "You didn't create this story alone, did you?" The witness remained silent. "Someone coached you." Silence again. "Someone promised protection if you repeated exactly what they told you." The witness looked toward the prosecutor's table one more time before lowering his head. "Yes." Gasps echoed throughout the courtroom. The prosecutor quickly argued that the witness was confused under pressure. But Hana was already presenting the next piece of evidence. She projected phone records showing dozens of late-night conversations between investigators and multiple witnesses before official interviews had even taken place. The dates were impossible to ignore. Would the prosecution like to explain why witnesses were repeatedly contacted before their statements became part of the investigation? No one answered. The judge's expression hardened. "The prosecution will respond." Their lead prosecutor stood slowly. "We will address those communications later." Hana nodded. "Of course. Then perhaps we should discuss something else first." She introduced a certified forensic expert who had spent months examining digital records connected to the case. The expert explained that several financial documents had been altered using editing software weeks after they had supposedly been seized by investigators. Every digital modification left microscopic traces invisible to ordinary users, but impossible for forensic specialists to miss. The courtroom listened in complete silence, as each technical explanation was supported by independent laboratory reports. By the end of the testimony, even journalists with little legal experience understood what it meant. Critical evidence had been manipulated. During lunch recess, the courthouse cafeteria buzzed with speculation. Reporters from international news organizations interviewed legal experts, all asking the same question. Who was the young attorney dismantling one of the country's biggest criminal cases? Few people knew anything about Hana beyond her impressive academic achievements. No one realized she had once slept beneath bridges during freezing winters. Meanwhile, inside a private conference room, Min-jae and Hana finally sat together for the first time in years without cameras watching them. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Min-jae quietly asked, "Did you eat?" Hana laughed softly. "You really haven't changed. Answer the question." "Not yet." Without saying another word, he pushed a lunchbox toward her. Inside were simple homemade dishes prepared by the mansion's longtime chef. "Mrs. Park insisted," he explained. "She said you'd forget to eat if you were working." Hana smiled as memories flooded back. Mrs. Park had been the first person to teach her how to bake bread. Mr. Choi had taught her chess. The security guards had secretly helped her learn self-defense. The gardeners had shown her how to grow roses. She hadn't simply been adopted by one man. She had been embraced by an entire family that shared no blood. "How is everyone?" she asked quietly. "They've all been watching." "Were they worried?" Min-jae smiled. "Terrified." She reached across the table and gently squeezed his hand. "It's going to be okay." He looked at her with the same quiet pride he had felt 15 years earlier beneath the old bridge. "I believed that the moment I heard you walked into the courtroom." After recess, the prosecution attempted to recover by introducing what they described as their strongest witness, a former executive named Park Do-yun. Unlike previous witnesses, Park appeared calm and confident. He claimed to possess first-hand knowledge that Min-jae had secretly controlled illegal operations through a network of shell companies. His testimony sounded detailed and convincing. Reporters quickly resumed taking notes. Some observers wondered whether Hana had finally encountered evidence she couldn't overcome. She listened patiently until the prosecutor finished. Then she stood. "Mr. Park, how long have we known each other?" The witness looked confused. "I don't believe we've ever met." Hana smiled gently. "Really?" She removed an old university photograph from her folder and placed it on the courtroom screen. The image showed a legal aid fundraiser from nearly 8 years earlier. Standing near the back was Park himself. Beside him stood Hana, speaking with several volunteers. The witness's face turned pale. "You attended our legal ethics seminar," Hana continued. "You even introduced yourself afterward." The courtroom became silent again. "During our conversation, you told me you dreamed of becoming a respected executive because your father had lost everything after trusting dishonest business partners." Park said nothing. Hana reached into another folder. "I also kept every email you later sent asking for career advice." She displayed several messages on the screen. In those emails, Park repeatedly praised Min-jae as a fair employer who had given him opportunities no one else would. One message ended with the words, "Mr. Kang changed my life. I hope one day I can repay his kindness." Hana looked directly at him. When did that gratitude become this testimony? Park's breathing became uneven. Did someone threaten you?" Silence. "Did someone threaten your family?" His eyes filled with tears. Finally, he whispered, "My son." The courtroom erupted once again. Through trembling words, Park confessed that unknown individuals had kidnapped his teenage son for 2 days, several months earlier. They released the boy unharmed, but warned that worse would happen if Park refused to cooperate with investigators. Every false statement he had made was driven by fear, not hatred. The judge immediately ordered an investigation into the allegations. Prosecutors denied any involvement, but suspicion had already spread across the courtroom. As Park stepped down from the witness stand, he stopped beside Min-jae. Bowing deeply, he struggled to speak through tears. "Boss, I'm sorry." Min-jae simply nodded. "Go home to your family." There was no anger in his voice, no demand for revenge, only relief that another father would not lose his child. Hana watched quietly. She realized that despite everything the world believed about Kang Min-jae, the man who had rescued a hungry little girl all those years ago was still the same man sitting beside her now. And somewhere inside the crowded courtroom, Someone hidden among the spectators silently watched every moment with growing concern, because Hana was getting dangerously close to uncovering the one secret powerful enough to destroy not just the case, but the conspiracy behind it. The final witness's confession sent shockwaves far beyond the courtroom. Within hours, government officials demanded internal reviews, financial markets reacted to the uncertainty, and news anchors who had spent weeks describing Kong Min-jae as a criminal began asking whether he had become the victim of something much larger. Outside the courthouse, thousands of people gathered behind police barricades. Some still believed Min-jae was guilty. Others had begun questioning everything they had been told. Social media exploded with clips of Hana's calm cross-examinations. Millions watched her dismantle testimony without insults, anger, or theatrics. She relied only on facts, patience, and truth. Even experienced legal analysts admitted they had rarely seen such disciplined courtroom strategy. Inside the courthouse, however, Hana wasn't celebrating. She knew the prosecution's mistakes were too organized to be accidents. Someone with enormous influence had carefully constructed this entire case over several years. False witnesses, altered documents, missing records, coordinated testimony, none of it could have happened without powerful people working together. She returned to the defense table and quietly opened the final section of her briefcase. Mr. Choi noticed a small envelope tied with a faded blue ribbon. His expression changed immediately. He recognized it. 15 years earlier, on Hana's first birthday after arriving at the mansion, Min-jae had handed her that very envelope. "Don't open it until the day you believe the truth is more important than protecting me," he had said. She had never opened it. Not once. Now she carefully untied the ribbon. Inside were several handwritten letters, a flash drive, and one old photograph. Min-jae watched silently. He had almost forgotten the envelope existed. Hana slowly read the first letter. It was written entirely in Min-jae's handwriting. "If you are reading this, then I have failed to protect you from the world I wanted you to avoid. Everything inside this envelope belongs to you now. Years before I met you, I began secretly documenting every illegal attempt made by corrupt officials, executives, and rival organizations to manipulate innocent people. I never intended to use these records unless lives depended on them. If that day arrives, trust the evidence, not my reputation." Hana looked up at him. "You collected all of this?" Min-jae nodded. "Insurance. Against your enemies?" He shook his head. "Against people who believed power meant they would never answer for their choices." The flash drive contained thousands of encrypted files. Fortunately, Min-jae had also included the passwords inside the envelope. Hana immediately connected the drive to her laptop. As folders opened one after another, Mr. Choi quietly whispered, "My goodness." Every file contained carefully dated records spanning nearly 2 decades, secret meeting notes, financial ledgers, audio recordings, surveillance photographs, copies of confidential agreements. Min-jae had documented everything, even events that placed himself under suspicion. Hana understood why. He hadn't collected evidence to save himself. He had preserved the truth in case innocent people were ever blamed. Suddenly, one folder caught her attention. Its title simply read, "Phoenix." She opened it. Inside were dozens of files connected to a hidden operation that had quietly influenced investigations, media reports, political appointments, and financial prosecutions for years. The name appeared repeatedly beside one individual. Chief Prosecutor Han Sung-woo. Hana's heartbeat quickened. She immediately searched the courtroom records. Han Sung-woo wasn't leading today's prosecution. He was supervising it from behind the scenes. Everything suddenly made sense. Witness coaching, altered evidence, coordinated timelines. Someone had been directing the entire case while remaining almost invisible. Hana closed the laptop and walked directly to the judge. "Your Honor, the defense respectfully requests permission to introduce newly discovered evidence that directly affects the integrity of these proceedings." The prosecutor objected before she finished speaking. "Absolutely not. These materials have not been reviewed. Hana calmly replied. Neither were the altered financial records introduced against my client. The courtroom fell silent. The judge considered both arguments before answering, "The court will review the evidence." Hana submitted the flash drive together with authenticated copies of several files. Within minutes, court technicians confirmed the metadata showed the documents had existed years before the current investigation began. More importantly, the files contained internal communications that should never have existed outside government systems. One email immediately drew everyone's attention. It instructed investigators to build the narrative first and locate supporting witnesses afterward. Another advised delaying certain forensic examinations until document revisions had been completed. Every message originated from accounts connected to Operation Phoenix. The prosecution's legal team turned pale. Several members quietly avoided eye contact with one another. The judge's expression hardened with every page he read. Finally, he looked directly toward the supervising prosecutor, seated several rows behind the main legal team. Chief Prosecutor Han Sung-woo, would you please stand? Every camera inside the courtroom pointed toward him. Slowly, the respected prosecutor rose from his seat. He appeared remarkably calm despite the attention. Do you deny knowledge of Operation Phoenix? The judge asked. Han adjusted his tie before answering. No. A stunned silence swept through the courtroom. Even the reporters stopped typing. However, Han continued. The defense is misunderstanding its purpose. Hana stepped forward. Then please explain it. Han smiled faintly. Operation Phoenix was never created to destroy Kang Min-jae. The courtroom waited. It was created to protect people far more powerful than him. Those words landed like thunder. Before anyone could ask another question, the rear courtroom doors suddenly burst open. Federal investigators entered alongside officers from the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. Their leader approached the judge and presented an emergency warrant. Your Honor, based on evidence submitted during today's proceedings, we have authorization to immediately detain several individuals connected to an ongoing corruption investigation. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as investigators walked not toward Min-jae, but towards senior government officials sitting behind the prosecution. One by one, they were escorted from the courtroom. Reporters rushed outside to broadcast the breaking news. Cameras captured images no one had expected to see. Politicians, executives, investigators, advisors, all leaving under police escort. Yet amid the chaos, Hana noticed something unsettling. Chief Prosecutor Han hadn't moved. Instead, he quietly looked toward her with an expression that wasn't fearful. It was almost sympathetic. As officers approached him, he calmly said, Attorney Kang, if you believe this is the end of the story, then your father kept one secret even from you. Hana froze. Min-jae's eyes narrowed. For the first time since the trial began, genuine concern crossed his face. Han smiled sadly before extending his hands for the handcuffs. Ask him what really happened the night he found you beneath that bridge. Then he walked away without saying another word, leaving Hana staring at the man who had rescued her 15 years earlier, suddenly wondering whether the story she had believed her entire life was only half the truth. The courtroom slowly emptied, but Hana remained standing beside the defense table, unable to take her eyes off Kang Min-jae. For 15 years, she had believed she knew every important chapter of her life. Now a single sentence from a man in handcuffs had shaken that certainty. The reporters outside continued shouting questions. Cameras flashed through the courthouse windows, and police escorted officials away one after another. Yet inside the courtroom, only silence remained. Hana finally looked at Min-jae. Was he telling the truth? Min-jae closed his eyes for a brief moment before answering. Yes, she swallowed hard. Then tell me everything. The judge quietly granted a temporary recess after recognizing that the new evidence had completely changed the direction of the trial. The courtroom was cleared except for Hana, Min-jae, Mr. Choi, and two court officers, Min Jae slowly removed an old silver watch from his pocket. It had scratches across the back and a cracked crystal that he had never repaired. Hana had seen him carry it every day since she was a child, but had never asked why. He gently placed it on the table. "This belonged to your father." Hana stared at him in disbelief. "My father?" Min Jae nodded. "Your real father wasn't a criminal. He was an investigative journalist." Mr. Choi quietly lowered his head. "He had carried this secret for years." Min Jae continued. 15 years ago, your father uncovered Operation Phoenix. He discovered that corrupt politicians, wealthy businessmen, and powerful officials had secretly worked together to control investigations, destroy honest competitors, and silence anyone who threatened them. He collected evidence just like I did." Hana's hands trembled. "Then, what happened?" "They found out." Min Jae's voice remained calm, but the pain behind it was unmistakable. "Your father knew he was being followed. The night before he disappeared, he contacted me." Hana looked shocked. "You knew him?" "We weren't friends. Years earlier, he had investigated several companies connected to my business. He discovered something unexpected. While many believed I controlled everything through violence, he learned I had secretly prevented several human trafficking groups from operating in territories under my influence. We disagreed on many things, but we both hated people who hurt innocent families." Min Jae looked toward the courthouse window before continuing. "Your father trusted almost no one, but on that final night he trusted me with the most important thing in his life. You." Tears slowly rolled down Hana's face. "He asked you to protect me. He said they would never stop searching for you because they believed he had hidden evidence somewhere only his family could reach. To keep you alive, the world had to believe you were just another forgotten homeless child." Hana remembered every cold night beneath the bridge, every empty stomach, every lonely morning. You knew where I was all along?" Min Jae lowered his head. "No." Hana looked confused. "After your father disappeared, I arranged for trusted people to move you somewhere safe while I distracted those hunting you. But during the confusion, the people transporting you were attacked. They protected you, but they lost you in the crowd. For nearly 6 months, we searched every orphanage, shelter, hospital, and neighborhood in Seoul. We couldn't find you." His voice cracked for the first time. "The night I found you feeding pigeons beneath that bridge wasn't planned. It was a miracle." Hana covered her mouth as memories flooded back. She remembered the freezing night, the stale bread, the expensive coat placed around her shoulders. She had always believed a stranger had saved her. Now she realized he had been searching for her all along. "You recognized me?" she whispered. Min Jae smiled gently. "You were wearing the little silver bracelet your father described during our last conversation. The moment I saw it beneath your sweater sleeve, I knew." Hana looked at her wrist. She had kept the tiny bracelet all these years, without understanding why Min Jae had insisted she never remove it. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked through tears. "Because every person who knew your true identity became a target. I wanted you to grow up free, not hiding from enemies you never created." Before Hana could answer, the judge returned to the courtroom with several senior legal officials. "The court has completed its preliminary review," he announced. "Based on overwhelming evidence of fabricated testimony, altered documents, witness intimidation, and systemic corruption, every charge against Kang Min Jae is dismissed with immediate effect." The courtroom doors opened once again, this time allowing reporters back inside. Cameras flashed non-stop as the announcement echoed across every news channel in the country. The judge continued. "Furthermore, this court orders a full criminal investigation into Operation Phoenix and everyone associated with it, regardless of position or political influence." Applause unexpectedly filled the courtroom. Court staff, journalists, ordinary citizens observing the trial. Even several police officers quietly clapped. Not because a powerful man had escaped punishment, but because the truth had finally defeated corruption. As Min Jae stood to leave, dozens of reporters surrounded him outside the courthouse. "Mr. Kang, how did you know attorney Hana Kang would save your case?" one reporter shouted. Min Jae looked toward Hana, who stood smiling a few steps away. "Because 15 years ago, I gave a homeless little girl a warm meal and a room with a window." Another reporter quickly asked, "Did you expect her to become one of the country's finest attorneys?" Min Jae laughed softly. "No." "Then why did you adopt her?" He looked directly into the cameras before answering. "Because kindness should never depend on knowing how someone will repay you." The clip spread around the world within hours. Millions watched it online. News organizations across America, Britain, Canada, and dozens of other countries shared Hana's extraordinary story. Universities invited her to speak about justice and integrity. Charities launched new programs inspired by her childhood. Donations poured into shelters helping homeless children. Volunteers signed up in record numbers. People who had never met Hana began believing that one act of compassion could truly change the future. Several months later, the mansion overlooking Seoul looked very different. The massive gates remained, but children from local shelters now visited every weekend for meals, tutoring, music lessons, and sports. One entire wing of the property had been transformed into a learning center funded jointly by Hana and Min Jae. Mrs. Park still baked bread every Saturday. The gardeners still filled the grounds with flowers. The security guards now spent more time organizing soccer matches than standing watch. One quiet evening, Hana and Min Jae stood beside the same large window she had admired as a little girl. Snow gently covered the city once again. "Do you remember what I wished for?" Hana asked. Min Jae smiled. "A room with a window." She nodded. "I thought that window would let me see the world." She looked across the lights of Seoul before continuing. "I never realized someone was opening an entire future for me." Min Jae looked at the city in silence. After a moment, Hana slipped her hand into his, just as she had done when she was 8 years old. No words were needed. Some families are created by blood, others are created by a single decision, made on a cold winter night. 15 years earlier, one powerful man had stopped his car for a hungry little girl feeding pigeons with the last piece of bread she owned. He expected nothing in return. Years later, that same little girl stood before the highest court in the nation and protected the man who had first protected her. His empire survived, not because of wealth, influence, or fear, but because the greatest investment he had ever made was an act of kindness that came back when he needed it most. Like, subscribe, and support my channel. I really need your support. If you enjoy my video, please share it and leave your feedback in the comments.